Hello, my name is Liz Thompson, and this is a video for IME 315, Financial Decision Making for Engineers. This particular video is on the type of costs that we need to consider when we're making financial decisions. So looking at an overview of the class, there's these 5 areas that we're going to be talking about. This particular subject falls in the area of costs of products. So there's 3 sort of categories of costs that we consider. The first is variable costs, and these costs are ones that are related to sales or production volume, which means that for every extra item sold, we will incur a particular dollar amount increase in costs. So this would be something like raw materials, like we have to buy the items and then we resell them, or touch labor, which is that labor that is adding value to the product. And often this idea of touch is used because it's a way of considering whether this is direct or indirect costs. Also, sometimes we looked at variable costs and we think, well, they're variable in that you use more of them the more you produce. But they might be small, like screws or fasteners, or they might be some kind of consumable, like machine oil, that you would not necessarily consider as variable because it's hard to track. Those items would fall, even though they are technically variable, they would fall under the category of fixed. So examples of this for if you're making a pearl necklace like the one shown here would be the pearls are variable, the string, the jewel, the clasp, the tag, the time to do the assembly of each item, and inspection and packaging. So all of those would be considered variable costs. Now, if we look at a graph, if we have sales volume on the x-axis and costs on the y-axis, these variable costs are just a slope up. So the slope would be the dollar per unit change in total cost, and we would consider these to just be increasing for over the sales volume amount. So the next type of cost is fixed costs. So in these costs, we're looking at ongoing costs but not changing with volume. So this is in contrast to initial costs. These are ongoing fixed costs. So this would be something that's considered overhead, some non-touch labor. So you pay people, but they don't necessarily touch the product, also known as indirect labor. Maintenance cost, small items or consumables. So this was to be the items we talked about in the variable category, that they're technically variable, but they're hard to track, so we consider them fixed costs. So examples of this for making this pearl necklace would be rent, insurance, supervisor's salary. So this would be an example of a non-touch or indirect labor. Accounting department costs, or any kind of overhead costs in the operation that's necessary for the operation of the business. Office supplies, wax for preparing the string. So that's an example of a consumable that's variable. So the more you make, the more you have to use, but it's hard to track a particular amount of wax for each string. So we consider this a fixed cost. So again, if we look at this in a graph form and we have sales volume as the x-axis and cost as the y-axis, fixed costs are flat over a particular sales volume amount. So the next thing we're going to look at is initial. So this is actually a form of fixed costs, but it's a one-time cost. So this is one-time costs that are in support of revenue over multiple years. So this often is thought of as the initial investment in a business or a practice that you're working on. Something like patents purchase could also be something that would be considered a one-time cost that supports revenue over time. So in the case of this pearl necklace, that would be the cost of the workstations, any kind of tools that you had to buy, software, maybe there's software related to tracking the items, any kind of machines that you're going to be using. So all of these things are longer term, more than a year, and that's why we account for them in a little bit different way. But they're also considered a fixed cost. So over a certain sales volume, you would have these initial costs that would just occur no matter what the sales volume is. So one of the things we want to look at is if we put these costs together, if we put the fixed and the initial cost together, and then we add to that the variable cost, we get a line that looks like this, that's total costs. And if you look at this line, it's actually all lines are in the form of y is equal to mx plus b. And if we consider this, then the m value is the variable cost, the slope, the change in cost with the change in volume. That's a slope number. And the b value is the fixed cost. So sometimes we use this equation, this simple linear equation for a line, to account for costs. Also, it's an interesting thing that when we're talking about these variable and fixed costs, it's actually true that all costs are variable over a long enough time period or a long enough sales volume period. So let's look at this example of this fixed cost. We have this fixed cost up to a certain sales volume, and then we might hit the capacity, and we might need to increase this cost in order to, maybe we need to get another facility, so we have to increase our rent. Maybe we have to get another supervisor, so we have to increase our rent. That particular fixed cost. So you can see that over time, if we lower the sales volume, we would lower fixed cost, and if we increase sales volume, we'd increase it. But it's a kind of a step function. But if we come out far enough from this, this becomes a line, and we can consider all costs being variable over a particular period of time. So in this video, we covered the cost of products and looked at the various ways we understand costs associated with the associated costs.